face me and prove this isn't just in my head." His words keep circling through my mind, a relentless echo I can't shake as I wrestle with the shock of it all. Victor, my husband and Lily's stepfather, had never spoken to her like that before, his voice firm, almost daring, his eyes carrying a weight I didn't recognize. I could tell she understood him perfectly, even if she tried to brush it aside. As her mother, I felt it too, that shift in the air, and it left me uneasy. It started a few weeks ago, subtle at first, like the way the light changes before a storm rolls in over our Portland suburb. Victor's attention toward Lily had sharpened, moving past the usual concern of a step-parent. He'd been part of our lives for nearly a decade, ever since I married him when Lily was just 9, blending our quiet routines into this modest house with its sagging porch and overgrown roses. Back then, he'd been steady, reliable, helping with homework, driving her to soccer practice, the kind of things that made me grateful for him. But lately, something had changed. At first, it seemed harmless. He'd come home with little gifts for her, a pair of earrings, a sketchbook, nothing extravagant, just thoughtful enough to make her smile. He'd toss out compliments more often, praising her drawings or the way she'd fixed her hair, and sometimes he'd ask her to sit with him in the den while I was at the store or working late. I figured it was his way of staying connected now that she was 19, a young woman finding her footing. But as the weeks went on, his actions took on a different shade, something murky, something that made my stomach twist when I let myself think about it too long. I remember one afternoon in particular. It was a lazy Saturday, the kind where the drizzle keeps you inside. Lily was wearing a short sundress Victor had given her a few days earlier, pale blue, simple, but it hugged her frame in a way that caught the eye. She'd been in a good mood, humming as she stretched out on the couch with a book, while Victor sat in his armchair, flipping through the local paper. I was in the kitchen, chopping onions for dinner, when I heard him set the paper down. His voice cut through the quiet, low and deliberate. "You don't even know how special you are, do you?" I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board, and glanced into the den. Lily looked up, offering a shy smile, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of awareness she didn't voice. She didn't respond, just turned back to her book, and he let it hang there. I told myself it was nothing, just a proud stepdad moment, but the tone lingered in my head. From then on, I started watching closer, piecing together the shifts I'd missed. That night, the house felt too still. I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from a long shift at the clinic, leaving Lily and Victor downstairs. I didn't think much of it. They'd often stay up chatting or watching TV when I crashed out. But later, when Lily told me what happened, I could picture it too clearly. The hours ticked by, the silence stretching thin, and Victor's demeanor changed. He'd moved closer to her on the couch, his words growing softer, more personal, each one laced with an edge that wasn't there before. She said he'd sit there, leaning in, testing her with every sentence, small comments about her looks, questions about her plans, things that felt too intimate for a stepfather to ask. Lily didn't move, she told me. She sat there, caught between discomfort and a strange curiosity, her mind spinning as she tried to figure him out. His behavior wasn't normal, not the Victor the first knew, the one who'd fixed her bike tires and cheered at her games. Yet she didn't pull away. She said she felt this pull, this need to see how far he'd take it, like a game she hadn't agreed to play but couldn't quit. She kept her cool, waiting for him to show his hand. The room must have felt suffocating, she said, the quiet pressing in, broken only by the creak of the couch or the rustle of his shirt as he shifted. I can imagine it, Victor edging nearer, his movements careful but deliberate, his hand brushing close to hers under the pretense of reaching for the remote. He was pushing a line, testing how much she'd let slide, and she saw it clear as day. In those moments, he didn't look at her like the little girl he'd helped raise. He saw something else, someone he wanted to shape, to draw into his orbit. She knew it, felt the weight of where it could go, but she didn't stop him. Not yet. She just watched, letting it play out, her silence a mirror to his intent. Then came the moment that changed everything. Later that evening, while we were sitting together in the living room after dinner, Lucian leaned in. His voice dropped to a low, steady tone as he repeated, "Turn around and show me that I'm not mistaken." The words hung in the air. I felt a mix of apprehension, uncertainty, and a subtle sense of empowerment. I stared at him, trying to determine if he was sincere or if this was just another one of his subtle tests. Taking a deep breath, I met his gaze evenly. "I know what you're implying," I said calmly. My voice was steady, even as my heart pounded. I did not raise my voice or act rebellious, but my expression gave nothing away. In that charged silence, I knew that every move from then on would influence the course of our relationship. I had to balance caution with the need to stay true to myself. I was not ready to surrender my independence completely. As the minutes passed, I felt the weight of his words settle over us. Lucian's eyes never left mine, and I sensed that he expected a response, a sign that I would either welcome or decline his approach. I chose to remain silent, letting the quiet build until it was almost tangible. Every second felt like an eternity, and I knew that the choices I made in the next few moments would be pivotal. I also realized that I was at a crossroads. If I allowed him to continue in this manner, nothing would ever be the same, yet part of me was curious about where this intricate game would lead. I resolved not to be a passive participant in this delicate scenario, to observe, learn his moves, and use my understanding to guide the situation, whatever the cost. The quiet in the room was profound. I could hear my own breathing as I weighed my options. I recalled every compliment and every ambiguous gesture from the past few weeks, understanding that the situation was evolving quickly. Tonight was a turning point. I could almost sense that what happened next would change everything, and I braced myself for the inevitable challenge of wills. I knew that the coming moments would be even more intense, the stakes were high, and the path forward was uncertain. I had no idea what his next move would be, but I did know one thing: I would not allow him to shape this narrative without clarity. I would wait for that moment when his true intentions became evident, and I would be ready. The next day, Lucian invited me to lunch at an upscale restaurant. I accepted his invitation without hesitation. Later, my mother questioned why I was chosen instead of her, remarking, "We rarely spend time together with Ophelia." His casual explanation did little to hide the underlying intent, and I already sensed that today's meeting was more than just a friendly lunch. The restaurant's atmosphere was modern and efficient. Lucian reserved a private table in a secluded corner to ensure our conversation remained uninterrupted. Once we were seated, he ordered a costly bottle of wine and arranged for discreet service. Every detail was handled with precision, as if designed to create an environment where nothing would distract from the discussion. Lucian began the conversation by discussing practical matters about my future. "You should think more about yourself," he said steadily while maintaining direct eye contact. "You have the potential to achieve everything you want if you focus on your own ambitions." As he spoke, his hand rested briefly on mine, a touch that was deliberate and measured. Although his tone was composed, I sensed that his interest in me extended beyond simple concern. I responded with a controlled nod and a slight, non-committal smile. Every word and gesture was carefully planned. Despite his outwardly supportive language, the subtext of his remarks hinted at a personal agenda. The way he touched my hand and the intensity of his gaze confirmed that our interaction was growing increasingly intimate. After our meal, Lucian suggested we continue our conversation with a walk in a nearby park. "Let's get some fresh air," he said. The change in setting felt natural. The formal ambience of the restaurant gave way to the calm, orderly paths of the park. We left the restaurant together and walked side by side along paved sidewalks, surrounded by neatly trimmed lawns and scattered benches. During the walk, the conversation shifted from general topics to more personal matters. After several minutes of quiet companionship, we reached a secluded area near a line of mature trees. There, Lucian stopped and turned to face me directly. "You know, there is something more between us," he stated plainly. His tone was firm, and there was no ambiguity in his words. I maintained silence, choosing not to respond immediately. My silence was a way to gather my thoughts and assess the situation. In that brief pause, I felt a shift in the balance of our exchange. Up until that moment, Lucian had led the interaction, setting the terms and guiding our conversation. Now, I realized I might have the opportunity to express my own desires. Without waiting for a response, Lucian continued, "Our connection isn't just about routine or convenience. There's something unique here, something that could redefine our relationship." His words were direct, and his steady tone left little room for negotiation. As he spoke, his hand moved again, briefly touching my arm with purpose. I noted every detail, the warmth of his touch, the steady look in his eyes, and understood that he expected me to acknowledge the deeper meaning behind his words. Despite the intensity of the moment, I kept my reactions measured. I asked a few clarifying questions about what he meant by something more, and his answers were plain and sincere. "I see potential for change in both of us," he said simply. "It's not just about what I want, it's about what you could become if you embraced the opportunity." His answers were pragmatic and devoid of embellishment. As we resumed our walk, the conversation took on a reflective tone. Lucian talked about opportunities and potential changes in my life without venturing into overly personal territory. "You have the strength to make significant decisions," he stated, his voice calm and steady. I listened carefully, aware that his words were as much about guiding my future as they were about deepening our current connection. We passed a few park benches where other visitors sat quietly, but our focus remained solely on each other. The steady hum of nearby conversation provided a neutral backdrop as I continued to weigh his words. Every sentence he uttered was deliberate and calculated to advance our discussion. I realized that this meeting was not just about the present moment, it was setting the stage for a future that would force me to confront important decisions. At one point, Lucian paused near a fountain, the sound of water setting a rhythmic pace for our conversation. "I believe that if you focus on your ambitions, nothing can hold you back," he said while offering his arm as we navigated a slight incline. I accepted the gesture, not as a sign of yielding, but as a practical acknowledgement that our conversation was progressing toward matters that would affect my life significantly. Eventually, the walk brought us back toward the park entrance. By then, the tone had shifted from casual to one that carried a sense of conclusion. Lucian's earlier words had established a clear invitation, a chance for our relationship to evolve into something far more consequential. I was left with no doubt that the discussion had profound implications, even if he had not yet spelled out all the details. Before parting ways, Lucian said, "Think about what I've said today. There is a real opportunity here for change." His tone was firm yet measured, and I could tell that he expected a thoughtful reply in the near future. I simply replied, "I will," and then we separated. Later that day, as I drove home, I replayed every moment of the day, the lunch meeting, the deliberate yet pointed remarks, the walk in the park. It all painted a picture of a man whose interest in me was growing more layered. I understood that the balance of our exchange was shifting and that I would soon face choices that could redefine my future. That evening, after I stepped out of the car with a sense of cautious resolve, I realized that today's encounter was only the beginning of a deeper exploration. Lucian's clear statements and measured gestures had set in motion a series of events that would force me to make important decisions in the days ahead. Alone in my room, I reviewed the day's events. The clarity of his words left little ambiguity. Our interaction had crossed a threshold, and the consequences were imminent. I understood that the change between us was deepening and that the next phase of our relationship would challenge everything I thought I knew about boundaries and choice. I prepared for the evening with one thought in mind: the stakes were rising, and I must decide how much I was willing to risk. In the following days, Lucian began appearing in places where I least expected him. One morning, as I was heading to my regular gym session, I spotted his car parked near the entrance. Puzzled by his sudden appearance, I paused. Inside the gym, I heard a familiar voice call out, "I was just passing by and thought you might need a ride." I turned to see him leaning casually against his car, a slight smile on his face. There was a quiet kindness in his gaze that did not match the casual tone of his words. I replied with a simple nod and continued with my workout, all the while aware that his actions were becoming more deliberate. Later that day, Lucian sent a message inviting me to his office. "Come by my office. This is only for you." See how I work. Despite knowing that his motives went beyond mere professional courtesy, I agreed, partly out of genuine interest and partly because I sensed that this was his way of moving our connection forward. I arrived at his office building, a modern structure with large, floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was sleek and meticulously organized, reflecting his personality and success. Inside his office, Lucian greeted me at the reception before leading me to his private workspace. He pulled out a chair for me and motioned for me to sit next to him at the desk. Several folders and electronic devices were arranged neatly as he began to show me his ongoing projects. "I want you to see the work that drives me," he said, his explanations clear and practical as he focused on the details of his business ventures. However, as the minutes passed, the conversation shifted from work to a more personal note. Pointing to a detailed chart on his computer screen, he leaned in closer and lowered his voice. "You're the only one who truly understands me." His words carried an intensity that invited a closer connection. I listened intently, aware that his comments were designed to bridge the gap between professional admiration and personal interest. I maintained a neutral expression and answered with brief, thoughtful remarks. Although I asked a few clarifying questions to ensure that the discussion stayed centered on practical matters, I could sense that Lucian was carefully choosing his words to leave a lasting impression. Every action seemed intended to deepen the connection between us. That evening, after my mother had returned home, I went back to my room only to find a neatly folded note on my desk. The note was short and direct. "We need to talk in private. Don't make me wait." The message was clear, and it added a new layer of urgency to the evolving nature of our interactions. It was Lucian's way of indicating that he wished to take our connection further. I spent the rest of the evening lost in thought, the note resting on the table like a silent challenge. Its words echoed in my mind as I traced back the events of the past few days, his unexpected appearances that caught me off guard, the measured yet strangely intimate conversation we'd had at the gym, and now this invitation to his office that ended with a personal remark I couldn't shake. Each moment seemed to build on the last, a quiet escalation I hadn't fully noticed until now. His persistence wasn't just a fleeting thing anymore, it was steady, deliberate, weaving itself into the fabric of my daily life. The note, with its clear intent, left me unsettled, a mix of apprehension and a cautious, almost reluctant curiosity about what might come next. On one hand, I was taken aback by how often he reached out, how his invitations seemed to multiply. On the other, I found myself reassessing my own reactions, wondering if I'd misread him all along. His actions felt like a challenge now, a puzzle I needed to unravel rather than a threat to push away. I knew whatever I did next would carry weight, steering the course of our relationship in a direction I couldn't yet predict. The note sat there, demanding a decision: confront Lucian's behavior head-on or let the situation evolve on its own terms? My mind churned through possibilities. There was no simple resolution. The prospect of a deeper connection tugged at me, undeniable and tempting, but the risks loomed just as large. Accepting his next move might mean stepping into territory I'd once sworn to avoid. I resolved to take my time, to weigh my options carefully. The note was proof he'd push forward without hesitation, and I promised myself I wouldn't be blindsided by whatever he did next. I'd watch his every word, every gesture, determined to keep control over where this was headed. One evening, Lucian called with an offer: a concert. "It'll be unforgettable," he said, his voice low and earnest over the phone. I hesitated, my reservations bubbling up alongside my mother's gentle but pointed questions about why he was always around. She'd asked more than once, her tone laced with worry, and I didn't have a clear answer for her, or myself. Still, I said yes, drawn by something I couldn't quite name. The concert hall was alive when we arrived, packed with people, the air thick with anticipation. Yet my attention stayed fixed on Lucian. He stood beside me, hands in his pockets, his posture calm but his eyes betraying a flicker of nerves. Throughout the performance, I caught every subtle shift, the way he glanced at me during quiet moments, the slight tension in his jaw. He was trying to project assurance, but I saw through it, sensing a sincerity beneath the surface that I hadn't fully clocked before. When it ended, we left together, the crowd spilling out around us, and headed to a nearby bar. The shift felt seamless, natural. In the bar's dim lighting, away from the concert's roar, we settled at a small table in a corner. The atmosphere softened, and our conversation took a turn, less guarded, more personal. Lucian leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, "You know, I'm willing to do anything for you." His voice was direct, cutting through the hum of the room, and his hand reached out, brushing mine. I pulled back just enough, a reflex that hid my surprise and the quiet jolt of recognizing his vulnerability. I steadied myself and offered a small smile. "I need to understand you better, Lucian. Why do you always hesitate?" My tone was calm but firm, a gentle push for truth rather than a confrontation. His eyes dropped to the table, a faint shadow crossing his face as he paused. The silence stretched, filled only by the bar's soft music and distant chatter. I waited, knowing his answer mattered. Finally, he looked up, meeting my gaze. "Because I'm afraid of losing you," he said quietly. No grand speech, just a raw, simple truth that carried more weight than I'd expected. I saw the slight tremble in his hand, the way he couldn't hold my stare for long. It was a side of him I hadn't anticipated, someone so outwardly confident stripped bare in a single sentence. I took a breath, processing, then replied evenly, "I appreciate that, Lucian, but I'm not won over by words alone. I need clarity, consistency." My response was deliberate, leaving no room for missteps. I wanted him to see that his honesty, while real, didn't erase the questions still hanging between us. He stayed quiet for a moment, eyes fixed on the table, the tension between us shifting like a tide. What he'd said, and how I'd answered, marked a turning point. Our careful exchanges were giving way to something unguarded. I finished my drink in silence, letting the moment settle, aware that his next words, or lack of them, would shape what came next. The following evening, I was home alone again, the house quiet save for the faint hum of the night outside. I chose the tight dress Lucian always complimented, knowing it'd catch his eye. As I descended the stairs, a gentle anticipation hung in the air, a thread of tension I couldn't ignore. He was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine in hand, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with a subtle eagerness. I sat beside him, the space between us small, charged. He broke the silence first, voice low, "Do you know what you do to me?" His hand settled on my shoulder, warm and steady. I didn't pull away this time. Instead, I turned to him, meeting his gaze directly. "And are you sure you want this?" My words were simple, cutting through any pretense. He leaned closer, his presence filling the room, his breath soft against my skin. "I can't hold back any longer," he whispered, his hand sliding slowly from my shoulder to my waist. The quiet amplified every sound, our breathing, the faint creak of the couch. The intensity built, deliberate and heavy. For a moment, I let it linger, feeling the closeness, but at the last second, I drew back. "Lucian, you have to prove I can trust you," I said firmly, locking eyes with him. My voice was even, resolute. His expression shifted, surprise and uncertainty flickering where confidence had been. He opened his mouth, searching for words, when the door swung open. My mother stood there, her face a mask of shock and concern. "What's going on?" she demanded, voice rising. Lucian stammered, words tripping over themselves as he tried to explain. I lifted my wine glass, holding it steady, and said, "Lucian, I thought you were stronger." My tone was calm but sharp, a quiet rebuke. My mother stepped forward, her presence commanding as she guided him out. The door closed behind him, and the silence that followed was thick with unspoken change. I stood there, processing the relief, the uncertainty, the sudden shift. I'd taken control, navigated the moment to its end. With Lucian gone, a new balance settled in. That night, alone on the couch, I replayed it all. His persistence had been a dance, one he'd orchestrated, lunch meetings, park walks, office talks, all leading here. I wouldn't bend to hollow promises. The wine cooled my nerves as I thought it through. His interest wasn't just admiration, It carried a price I wouldn't pay without trust. His touch, his confession, they'd shown depth, but I needed more than intent. I'd pulled back, demanded proof, and reclaimed my ground. The quiet felt like a promise of something new. I resolved to steer my future, not follow his lead. The stakes were higher now, every choice would echo forward. I'd watch, weigh, and hold my boundaries, ready for whatever came next, my resolve firm as the night stretched on.